Hello, and welcome back to the Unofficial Gilded Age Aftershow. We are so excited to be here to chat about Season 2, Episode 5 of the Gilded Age, Close Enough to Touch. My name is Kelsie Paul. I'm the Manager of Interpretation and Engagement at the Frick Pittsburgh, and I am joined by two of my favorite colleagues today to chat about the episode. We have Dawn Reed-Breen, who is our Chief Curator and Director of Collections, and we also have Amanda Gillen, Director of Learning and Visitor Experience. Before I go on, I have to say a big thank you to Amanda for hosting while I was away. I really appreciate it. She did a beautiful, beautiful job. And today she's here as a guest, so she can take a little bit of a backseat and just enjoy herself, hopefully. I am very excited to be back hosting our after show today. I like to start with an episode synopsis. So for episode 5, after sharing her news, Ada questions moving ahead without Agnes's support. Elsewhere, Peggy experiences the dangers of the South, and Bertha entertains a special guest in Newport. So I think we wanted to start with that. We wanted to start with Bertha's big dinner for the Duke, which is obviously a very exciting thing, a very big moment for Bertha in a lot of ways. We get to see her and the staff preparing for this massive, important dinner at their quote unquote cottage in Newport. And, you know, as always, I think the show does a really nice job of showing what kind of work goes into something like that. We see all of the preparations, we see the extra staff that they have to bring in, all of that stuff. And one of the things that I've noticed this season is the importance of creating the perfect seating chart. Bertha in particular is very good at using a seating chart to her advantage. She's shown that to us a couple of times. And Dawn, I know that we have a seating chart in our collection. So can you talk a little bit more about that, of the importance of a seating chart in terms of etiquette, and also how women like Mrs. Frick or Bertha would use that to kind of create their perfect dinner party?
Yeah, definitely. We actually have 2 seating charts in our collection, and these weren't used at Clayton. They were probably used at the Frick family's other residences, and we will share some images here. And handwriting that you see is Adelaide Frick's handwriting. So the hostess is playing a pivotal role in who is seated next to who. It was very essential to make sure that you had good flowing conversation. And you, of course, could be very savvy like Bertha, who has, you know, created her own seating chart in underhanded ways and in overt ways in this episode. But generally, the host and the hostess are seated kind of across the table from each other, with the most important male guest being seated next to the hostess. So you see Bertha sitting next to the Duke, and then Aurora Fane, I think, is sitting with George right across the table. But of course, Bertha's making sure that her daughter Gladys is seated on the other side of the Duke. And I think we are definitely right. We are gearing up for a Dollar Princesses storyline, as we talked about in the last episode. But yes, there's all, as the orchestrated kind of performance of society at the table, it is so important who is seated next to whom, and kind of filtering out. The closer to the center of the table that you were, the more important of a guest you were. So a little farther out, you might be younger or newer to the social class and order.
So I noticed Turner is sitting on the outside. She's towards the end of the table, so I didn't pick up on that until just now, but that's interesting.
Far from the Duke is Bertha.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Very fun. So let's talk about Gladys, because I don't know about you guys, but I was thinking about, you know, so obviously Gladys is surprised that she is seated by the Duke. Mm-hmm. She, you know, like you mentioned, Dawn, she's a younger guest, so she mentions that she expects that she's going to be down at the end of the table, and then she's a little shocked to find out that she's seated right next to our guest of honor. The Duke seems, I think, a little intrigued by Gladys. Gladys doesn't seem to be thinking much of anything. Like, she doesn't seem like she's really picking up on what her mother is laying down a little bit. But let's talk a little bit more about the Dollar Princesses. Dawn, I know you've done research. These are very real women. Lots of different women were categorized as Dollar Princesses. But who were these real women? What were they going through? And how did things turn out for most of them? Because I don't think it's necessarily the fairy tale that we would expect.
No, I think we talked a little bit in the last episode. So these dollar princesses are generally really wealthy American heiresses who are marrying for a social title. And in exchange, they are infusing the English and European aristocracy with money. In England, specifically, I think the landed gentry is kind of coming down. There's less money and there's more money and more social prestige with the American social class. So you see them kind of marrying in together. I think one of the most popular or well-known stories of a dollar princess is Consuelo Vanderbilt. And of course, we've talked before about Bertha being modeled on Alva Vanderbilt, which is why I am suspicious of Gladys's future here with the Duke. And Amanda, you mentioned too that Jenny Churchill, the mother of Winston Churchill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think she was also an American who, was either married off or chose to marry a British man and went overseas. Yeah.
So sometimes I'm sure these matches were successful, but I think more often than not, the stories are that they are just that. They are a social match kind of made for advantageous reasons. And especially Consuelo Vanderbilt, her story is not particularly happy. And, eventually she is divorced. So we'll see how this storyline plays out.
Yeah, I feel like Gladys has made it pretty clear that she would like to marry at least somewhat for love. She would like to have some kind of love match. I feel like that was part of the reason that she really wasn't into Oscar. She wanted to have more of a strong match and relationship. So it'll be interesting to see if she maybe becomes interested in the Duke, if he becomes interested in her or not. But I wish the best for Gladys. I just want Gladys to be happy.
Gladys has a road before her, though, and her father wants her to marry for love. Yeah. That was a couple episodes back where George Russell was saying, I want this for you. I want you to be happy. It's interesting. Her mother isn't letting Gladys in on the plan just yet, although there's that earlier scene where she's telling her not the blue dress, and Gladys said, I want to choose my own clothes. And what does her mother say? Like, but you'll choose wrong. Like, you'll choose the wrong thing. And Gladys is sort of clearly starting to grow up a little bit, but her mother has turned the screws back on, and is there's expectations there for how this is going to go, and Gladys doesn't seem to quite yet know what's expected of her. So yeah, we'll see. She's looked very young and just sort of confused. I was thinking about that idea of who you get seated by. I mean, it's such a responsibility. You may know ahead of time, but you may not. And there you are with these people to your left and to your right. And part of your social obligation is to hold up your end of the conversation, which can be a real challenge depending on who you're seated next to. And everybody's watching each other, watching it play out.
Yeah, the art of small talk is a big skill anyway. And so, but in this kind of society, yeah, you have to be able to carry on an interesting conversation with whoever you get seated next to. And I would not do well with that. That would stress me out so much.
Would.
So let's talk a little bit about Turner really quickly. So she's sitting down at the end of the table, just stewing because she has hatched this evil plan. Dawn likened it to her Disney villain-esque tirade at the end of the last episode where she's storming up the stairs and vowing revenge. And she puts this plan into action in this episode. She has planted a chef to help do the cooking, and he pours a bunch of weird powder into some food. But then she also has that footman who she was buddies with, who she is relying on. And I guess the plan is that he's going to spill soup, I guess, on the Duke. But Watson is kind of the guy. He comes to the rescue. He notices it all, and the staff kind of rises to the occasion and saves the day. I feel I don't understand the motivation of the footman, honestly, because now he's just going to get fired. Now you don't have a job. Was it worth it?
I have to say, at the end of the last episode, with her total rant and tirade, I really expected her revenge to be a lot more than spoiling a sauce and spilling some soup. I don't know about you guys, but I felt a little let down that that was her major revenge.
Yeah, that was the best that she could come up with, which yes, ruining this dinner was obviously her major goal, but yeah, I feel like she could have come up with something like a little more dramatic than that. I don't know.
And I guess she would have she hinted at making it worth the footman's while that she, was paying him in order to do this, but still, like, he would have been at risk. He would have been fired more than likely and at risk of not getting a good recommendation for any future job. So yeah, I have to ask if it was it worth it.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like he is going to get fired because there's that scene at the end where the staff and Church, I guess, is the one who says that he's going to go ahead and fire him. But that's interesting what you say. Yeah, staff like this, domestic staff, relied so much on recommendations from their previous employers that, yeah, he would absolutely shoot himself in the foot. He's not going to get a good recommendation from Church now. So,
and they weren't particularly sneaky about what they were doing either. They were like loudly whispering and joking.
Dumping the packet.
Yeah, it was like, could I be more obvious that I am throwing a weird mystery substance into this pot? It was just, it was not sneaky. But one person who is not at the dinner in Newport is Larry. Larry is going through it in this episode. He is in a little bit of a downward spiral from his breakup with Mrs. Blaine. And so Bertha basically says, okay, you're on timeout. You need to go back to New York and get yourself together. I cannot have you getting drunk at this party with the Duke. So he goes dutifully back to New York City. And George gives him a little job to keep him busy and sends him to this meeting for the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge. And in that process, we get to meet another character who is based on a real person, not the chief engineer, Roebling, who is supposed to be in charge of actually doing this construction, but his wife, Emily. And Amanda, I know you were really interested in this storyline and started doing your Googling while you were watching and have found some interesting connections and stories. So what can you tell us about the real Emily Roebling?
Yeah, I was just interested because I didn't know about Emily Roebling, and I'm sure some of our viewers do. And this reminds me that I have not read the book about the Brooklyn Bridge by, I think it's a David McCullough book, and I kind of want to now because I'm sure there are a million interesting sub-stories. I just didn't know about Emily Roebling, and so I did look her up, and I found a good piece in the New York Times. It's a section on several women, many women, called Overlooked Obituaries. And so it was an attempt to kind of fill in the historical record, because it was typically the sort of great white men who had their obituaries printed in the Times. And so at some point they went back and were writing pieces about women and others who were not represented when they passed away. And so Jessica Bennett wrote about Emily Warren Roebling. Emily's dates were 1843 until 1903. And I just didn't know about her as a person. The Roeblings are confusing too, because there is John Roebling, who is the father and who was the famous bridge designer. Emily's husband was Washington Roebling, who was the son of John Roebling. So the Brooklyn Bridge was designed by John Roebling, the father, but he died before construction began. And so his son, Washington, Emily's husband, was appointed chief engineer. But Washington does fall ill while the Brooklyn Bridge is being built, and Emily does step in and do the work for him. She's not an engineer, but she had grown up or had spent enough time with him and with his father. She was capable and smart. Pittsburgh connection. John Roebling designed not the Smithfield Street Bridge that we have now, which is one of our many bridges and a famous one, but a version before the one that we have now was designed by John Roebling before the Brooklyn Bridge. But this piece about Emily is interesting. I love when this show pulls in characters that you don't know about or you don't know much about. And sometimes they twist their storyline to be not true, but sometimes it is true. And So I just want to read this one quote. It's really fun. So this is this article by Jessica Bennett, and she quotes a letter that Emily Roebling wrote. So in 1898, Emily Roebling wrote this letter to her son, and she said, quote, "I have more brains, common sense, and know-how generally than have any two engineers, civil or uncivil. And but for me, the Brooklyn Bridge would have never had the name Roebling in any way connected with it." So she was owning her claim, her stake in making that bridge happen. This article also says that evidently, according to legend, she was the first person to cross the bridge, and that she was carrying a rooster. So she sounds like she was really something. And they portray that a little bit in the episode. I don't know that we'll see her again. Maybe we will, because the bridge seems to be a recurring storyline in this series, in this season. But it's just fun to go a little deep into some of these people that pop up, and they're real people, and they did really important work that Julian Fellowes sort of writes into this narrative for us. The other thing about Larry, I really like this scene when his mother sends him back to New York, because he's standing in front of her and he's still heartbroken, but you can tell that he wants to make up with his mother. You know, he looks like a little boy, kind of like he's standing in front of her and she's, you know, messing with his hair, and he's 24 years old or whatever, but he seems like a little kid. And then she sends him away, so he misses all the fun. But he's disgraced himself, so I guess he has to keep paying the price for a little while longer until she lets him back in. But I feel like we've said goodbye to the Mrs. Blaine storyline at this point, probably for the best.
I hope so. I'm waiting for a Mary and Larry love connection. I feel like it's destiny, but not.
They're so happy to see each other every chance they get.
Every scene they have, they're super sweet and charming. So I fully agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, to segue to a totally different part of the episode, a much more serious part of the episode, we of course want to talk about Peggy and T. Thomas Fortune. They have a really scary and dramatic ending to their trip to Tuskegee, which unfortunately, as we know, is a storyline that is based all too much in a harsh historical reality. And, you know, Thomas intervenes with this drunk white man who is a, you know, local official in Tuskegee, and ends with a physical altercation, you know, when Thomas stands up for B, the restaurant owner. And that results in Peggy and Thomas basically having to run for their lives. And Booker T. Washington and his wife get them basically out of Tuskegee and hide them until it's safe for them to travel. And they end up in this barn, you know, hiding, while essentially a lynch mob is outside looking for them. And there's a lot to unpack here. We will get to what happens in the barn, don't worry. But let's start with the more kind of serious, you know, historical context for this, because I think we've all talked about the fact that we do really appreciate that the show has made the effort to expand the worldview a little bit in this season. And I was listening to an interview with Erica Dunbar, who is an executive producer on the show and is a historian and consults for the show. And she commented that it was really important to her and also to Julian Fellowes for this season to show what the South was like, to be able to kind of juxtapose it with life in New York. And, you know, Peggy is definitely getting to see what her mother was warning her about, unfortunately. And she has that sort of, I think, harsh kind of reality check here that we see. And it's hard to watch and scary to watch, I think.
Yeah, I thought this, to juxtapose the drama of the, you know, drama, quote unquote, of the dinner scene with this, which felt like a really serious, like I was anxious watching this scene. I mean, this was a real life danger that could have, and often did in reality, end entirely differently. Like the stakes were so high here. Amanda, what do you think?
It just dawned on me now, the juxtaposition of the two dinner scenes, the way that you just said that, right? So we see this over the top, overly elaborate lifestyle in Newport. And then you see this restaurant that this woman is running. You know, Peggy had met her son at Tuskegee and he said, "Come by my mom's restaurant." You know, and there's progress and people are living their lives and she's proud of her restaurant and it's cozy and people are being fed. And then this awful reality of these white men sort of crash into it. And Peggy has never seen anything like that. But T. Thomas Fortune, and he says this later, he's like, I lived here. I was here. He'd been enslaved. But they live in New York, where they do, even though they're not able to do everything they want, they still have autonomy. I can't even imagine Peggy sort of processing what she saw, what happened, like the abject fear of it. I mean, she goes from being a journalist a couple of hours earlier to hiding in a barn away from a lynch mob. It just was such a I don't know, not eye-opening, that's not the right word, but for her to think about how that would stay with her and what she's going to take back to New York. And she says in the barn, my mother told me about this, but that's exactly what her mother never wanted her to see, and she lived it.
Well, and, even the conversation that she and Thomas are having at dinner before this big interruption, she's talking about how inspired she is by the students and how, they're working so hard to, reach their dreams and to make something of themselves, and how she wants to take that back to her own work. And you can see that she's feeling like things are changing and maybe things aren't as bad as her mother perhaps said. And then, this guy comes in and shows her exactly what the reality is in the South. And he even says, to Thomas, you think things have changed, but they haven't. And I think that is an important reminder when we think about the Gilded Age as a whole, that it is, the same era as the beginning of the Jim Crow South. And that, any progress that had been made in the 15-ish years after the Civil War, when Jim Crow comes, it's a big backslide, and a lot of things that were gained are taken away and stripped away. And that's what I think we see here. We can turn our attention to the other dramatic ending in the barn, which is the big dramatic kiss between T. Thomas Fortune, and is shaking her head, T. Thomas Fortune and Peggy. We talked at length about this yesterday. I don't think any of us are super big fans of this storyline. There may be some viewers out there who are shipping, Thomas and Peggy. But my whole thing is that T. Thomas Fortune was a real person. He was a real person. He was married to a real woman. And now he's been made a two-timer in HBO's The Gilded Age. And I think that's a little disrespectful to the actual man. But I'm not here for it. I don't know.
It felt so unexpected to me. Like, it just totally undermined, from my perspective watching it undermined the seriousness of this situation that they had just been in, when Peggy is confronted with this extremely ugly reality of life in the South. Like, there's so much to unpack in that scene, including the county commissioner's surname matching B's surname as well. Like, and you see Peggy have these really startling realizations. So to have, I don't know, I guess adrenaline does weird things to you, and I can see how maybe it would happen, but it felt untrue to the storyline. And believe me, I want Peggy to have some action. I want Peggy to have some romance. I am all for that. Yeah. I just don't want it to be with her married boss.
Agreed. No. And it's the most common story. No, it's not even storyline. What's the device?
Like a trope, yeah.
Yeah, like, I was watching it. Then don't kiss her. Don't kiss her. Please don't. Oh my God, he's kissing her. Don't be doing this. Like, that's it. And it's just another hurdle for her now too, which she doesn't deserve and doesn't need. And whether she cares for him or not, he is, as far as we know, married, and that she loves that job and she loves that work. And now this happened. And I don't know, we'll see where it goes from here. You found an article, I think Kelsie, or maybe it was Dawn, that the actress who plays Peggy is, sort of happy with the storyline. And it is different for Peggy to have some romance. But as we were saying yesterday, maybe it could have been somebody she met in the South, or a fellow reporter, or somebody who isn't her boss, who isn't a real person, as Kelsie has pointed out.
He's a real person. Justice for T. Thomas Fortune.
But his reputation has been tarnished now.
Yes. Well, Dawn, you were saying that now, the second thing that comes up when you Google T. Thomas Fortune is, was T. Thomas Fortune married? Because probably all of us who watch The Gilded Age are doing the Googling while we're watching it to see. Danae Benton, who plays, Peggy, said that she loves the second season because she feels like we're getting to see a fuller version, a more well-rounded version of Peggy, which I love too. I think that's so important, like you said, Amanda. But yeah, I wish they had created a different character for her to have that with. The two actors, they have great chemistry, so I get it, like why they would go down that road, but I don't know. I wasn't super jazzed about it. Sorry to those viewers out there who are really excited about it, but we are not.
Give us your comments. Give us your thoughts. Do you agree or not?
I want to hear, who are you shipping? Are you shipping T. Thomas and Peggy, or Marianne and what's his face? I've already forgotten his name.
Larry. So we'll see where it goes. I think it's going to be interesting. And I think if you've seen the preview for next week, I think Peggy goes back to New York with a fire lit within her. She is now gonna take what she experienced there and run with it, and it's gonna probably change her career. So I think that's an interesting thing for us to watch going forward. To, again, totally switch gears, we did want to end on a little bit sweeter of a note. We have to talk about sweet, sweet Ada and her lovely wedding to Reverend Forte. She finally gets her hopefully happy ending. It is not without a lot of drama in the lead up, mostly thanks to the sharp and biting tongue of Agnes. Agnes is on one in this episode. Like she is Agnes to the 10th degree.
Yeah. As Oscar says, like, this is harsh even for you.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Even her family, even her servants are like, this is not nice.
Too much.
Yeah. And, I think we've talked about, Amanda, I think you mentioned a couple weeks ago, we feel like her reactions ultimately are driven by a fear of being alone. She says that to, Luke Forte when she goes to see him. She says, like, I'm going to be by myself, which I think is the first time we hear her admit that out loud. So I definitely think that there is an honesty to that. But I think there is more to it. I think it's also a control thing. She's used to being the one kind of in charge and sort of mixing, she sees herself as being able to choose who Oscar is, or at least give her kind of approval of who Oscar is going to go with. Same thing with Marion. Whereas Ada has kind of just done this on her own, and she certainly wants Agnes's approval, but she has also made it clear that she doesn't need it. It's not going to stop her from doing what she wants to do. But to speak of the staff, I find myself really loving Bannister and Agnes together.
Yeah.
They have an amazing relationship, and I feel like we see it. There's a couple of times in this episode. One, when he says he has to cancel his congratulations or rescind his congratulations at Agnes's request. And then he, I think, is ultimately the one that convinces her to go. He's the one that says, you're going to regret this, so just go. And then you have that amazing shot of her just silhouette in the doorway.
And that
she somehow manages to take it over as her own moment.
Oh yeah, it's like no big deal. Now here comes Agnes in this very dramatic walk, slow walk down the aisle, and that
the door slams. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Well, I mean, she pulled out the et tu, so she was truly going for Shakespearean level drama, referencing Julius Caesar.
Bannister.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Amanda, you were talking, speaking of dresses, we were also going to briefly just kind of talk about Ada's dress because, in this time period, you are starting to see the kind of popularity of the white wedding dress. It's not quite to its, obviously, popularity that it has now. But it was very common for women to either pick a dress that they already had and style it up or change it up, or to buy something or to have something made that was a little more normal so that they could wear it again, which is essentially what Ada is doing. And she makes a point about the fact that, she's older. And so she feels like she maybe doesn't want to go through she doesn't want to make a big deal out of it.
Yeah, it was an interesting choice. I think the idea of wearing something you have or getting something you can wear again. That was common for more, middle class or people that didn't have the means that Ada has, really, because why sort of invest in something that is going to be worn once. Queen Victoria wears a white wedding dress, and that's the middle of the 19th century. The Metropolitan Museum of Art has an incredible costume collection. If you're interested, anybody who is, go on there and just Google, wedding dress, and you'll come up with a million examples and a lot of good information in the individual catalog entries about, what women were wearing when. It seems like Ada chooses a green blue dress, very vivid. She's very colorful. I mean, she's clearly conveying joy, and her maid puts the floral sort of straps on, and then she has that headpiece, which surprised me. It was very unexpected. My dad is part Hungarian, and it reminded me of just sort of the Hungarian flowers and the kind of Eastern European almost in its color, and it's a youthful headpiece. But I also think it makes sense that she's not a young bride. Like, for Ada, even getting married is something that she didn't think would happen. So putting on a white dress and maybe pretending to be a 25-year-old, 20-year-old bride wasn't for her, but her joy when she realizes that the church is filled for her. I mean, that just makes me tear up thinking about it, because she thought, what'd she say? I thought they wouldn't come because of Agnes, and they're here for me. It just made me cry. It was so sweet. But the minister, Luke was very firm about you'll be alone, but we would also be alone. It was just, he doesn't say that, but he really helps her to take a stand. In our comments from last week's episode, there were some cute exchanges. We love when you all chat with each other, that some of you out there don't trust him and this very quick kind of relationship and marriage. I hope there's nothing sinister. I don't know what there could be. She has standing and a family name, but she doesn't have great wealth. It's not like stealing Gladys or something, from the Russells. But I agree that it is fast. But then again, they're older a little bit and probably figure, what the heck do we have to lose?
Yeah, we had a great question in the comments basically asking, is this normal? What we're seeing from Ada and Luke, they have a really short engagement. Ada makes the point that she feels like she's waited long enough. She doesn't need a long engagement. But this question of, was that the norm to get married so fast? And Dawn, you were saying that basically the short answer is yes, it's not out of norm.
It certainly could be. It wasn't out of the norm. I think engagements as they are today could range anywhere from a few weeks to a year and a half or longer. I think it all just depended on the individual circumstances and where people were in their life. And for Ada and Reverend Forte, they're ready for this. I think maybe that is also why she chooses to refresh an existing gown, because 1 week is not enough time to go out and get a custom made wedding gown made either. So I love that she kind of freshens it up with that lace jacket and the sleeves. And I have to go back to this. I know we've left her dress behind, but it's a great comparison because this is 1883, right? So we have Ada in her really vibrant, colorful, remade wedding dress, and then Henry Frick and Adelaide Childs get married in 1883. And we have in our costume collection part of her wedding ensemble, which is beautiful ivory color with this great kind of damask pattern. So a little textured, but really fun comparison between a younger Adelaide is 21, I think, when they get married. So she might have been, more on trend wanting the new white wedding dress.
Well, and how long did Henry and Adelaide court?
Just gonna say, we have courtship letters from April of 1881, and they get married in 1881 in December. So their courtship is not even a full year. It seems like they are, newly acquainted in the spring, and then they're married in December. So yeah, not that long of an engagement at all.
You think about it, it's dating is not the way that we think about dating, now. Courting is a very prescribed social process. And so, people didn't spend years and years and years getting to know each other or living together before they get, there's none of that. So, so it's just a different, I think, way of getting to the altar. But yeah, I think Ada's journey is not, the strangest thing about Ada's journey, I think, is just that she's a little bit older of a bride, which I think was not as common back then, perhaps, unless maybe it was a second marriage or something like that. So yeah, we love that we're going to get to see Ada happy. I'm interested to see her kind of settle into her life as a wife outside of Agnes's house. That's going to be a really dramatic change. We've only ever seen Agnes and Ada together living in that townhouse. So it's going to be really interesting to watch Agnes adjust to her life without her little buddy that she's had in her house, and then watching Ada, hopefully, I think, spread her wings and fly and be happy and have her own house and her own space, and see how she reacts to that. We wanted to wrap up today's episode by just mentioning that we have noticed that Pittsburgh is getting name checked a lot in this episode.
Gosh, 3 different times in this episode.
It's like every time George Russell opens his mouth, he is saying that he's supposed to be in Pittsburgh, or he should be in Pittsburgh, but he says it with just a touch of derision, of kind of like, ugh, like I should be in Pittsburgh, like Pittsburgh is about to blow up kind of thing. But what that means for us, I think, is that, again, if you've seen the preview for next week, I think we are finally going to actually physically get to Pittsburgh. So we will have, I think, lots and lots to talk about next week. And I can't wait to see how they set deck Pittsburgh, because they did not film here. So it's going to be interesting to see what they get right, what they get wrong. And we'll probably be pointing some of that out. So it should be a lot of fun. So you are not going to want to miss next week's episode. Definitely come back and see us and hear about all of our reactions to our big trip to Pittsburgh and everything else that we have to look forward to. The synopsis for episode 6 is that George heads to Pittsburgh to deal with a potential strike, and Bertha gets word that the Duke will return for the opening night at the Met. So there will be lots of fun stuff to talk about next week. So don't miss it. We will be back then for all of our reactions to HBO's The Gilded Age. But until then, please don't forget to like our video. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the Fricks YouTube channel so you never miss an episode of the Unofficial Gilded Age Aftershow. I want to thank Dawn and Amanda for getting on and taking time out of their busy schedules to chat with me. And of course, if you are in Pittsburgh anytime in the near future, please stop by and see us at the Frick. You can tour our very own Gilded Age mansion, which, as we speak, is being transformed into a holiday wonderland, and by our beautiful curatorial team. We are launching our holidays tour in just a couple of days, which is a fun tradition that we love. So if you are in Pittsburgh in the next month, definitely come check us out and see it for yourself. But until next week, thank you for being with us, and we'll see you next time.